Unless you've been living under a rock for the past year, everybody is very familiar with the escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. North Korea has very quickly gone from developing their first nuclear weapon to building ballistic missiles capable of hitting nearly any point on Earth with a nuclear warhead. Over the years, concerned nations have tried without success to find a diplomatic solution to end the North's development of its nuclear program. Massive amounts of aid was given, numerous sanctions enacted, and the US pursued a period of strategic patience, none of which ended North Korea's nuclear ambitions. With talks of war between the US and North Korea, would China defend the North as they did 60 years ago during the Korean War? The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi actually answered this question in an interview this past summer. He stated that he supports the newly enacted sanctions on North Korea, and urged them not to further increase tensions by testing long-range missiles and more nuclear weapons. He then stated that if North Korea were to launch a missile that appeared to threaten the US and the US retaliated, China would not protect them. However, he stated that if the US were to strike North Korea first, then China would intervene. During the Korean War, China came to the defense of North Korea once they saw that they were on the verge of defeat. Over 1 million Chinese soldiers poured across the Yalu River separating China and North Korea to help fight the UN forces. China's intervention was a surprise to the US and the UN forces, and forced them to fight a retreating war all the way back to the 38th parallel. In the remaining 2.5 years, a stalemate occurred, and the war eventually ended practically right where it had begun. But in the 60 years since, the situation has changed. North Korea has become a major headache for China. China has propped up the North Korean government over the years financially, with aid, and protection. This started to change once North Korea successfully tested their first nuclear weapon in 2006. China's support for the country has strained their relations with their major trading partners like Europe, the US, and several Asian countries. And now a new issue has risen for China. If the North Korean regime collapses, millions and millions of refugees would possibly flee across the border. This refugee problem is already currently an issue for China. Every year, thousands of North Koreans cross the border into China, many of which are quickly caught and returned. It is believed that there is anywhere between 50,000 to 200,000 North Koreans currently living in hiding in China. China therefore has an interest in the stability of North Korea. They view the potential collapse and resulting crisis as a more dangerous issue for them than North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons. In the 60-plus years since the Korean War, most of the world has become highly dependent on other nations for trade. In the 1950s, China was a very different country than it is today. China was for all intents and purposes a closed country, meaning they conducted very little trade with other nations. In the 1950s, only 2% of their gross national product came from foreign trade. The majority of that was with the Soviet Union. This means they had very little to lose economically by getting involved in the Korean War. After Nixon visited China in the 1970s, this all changed. By 1985, foreign trade had increased to nearly 20% of their total GNP, and this number has continued to grow rapidly ever since. Today, the US alone consists of nearly 20% of all Chinese exports, or over $400 billion. They are by far their largest trading partner. The US allies in the region like South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan represent another 13% of all Chinese exports. Trade with South Korea has also recently increased dramatically. President Xi and President Park Geun-hye and successor Moon Jae-in have met on several occasions to increase relations and trade. China is now South Korea's top trading partner and is number 4 in China's largest trading partners. China involving itself in a war today with the US would have a colossal negative impact on their economy, and for that matter, a war with China would greatly hurt the US economy as well. Due to the massive number of nuclear weapons and interconnectedness of nations due to foreign trade, we never saw a World War III. Despite there being more than enough excuses for nations to have gone to war, the cost in terms of destruction and economic cost are just too great. The wars we have seen recently have been with much less powerful countries in terms of economic and military might. For example, the Vietnam War in the 1970s, the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s, and more recently the US-Afghan and the US-Iraq War, where before the advent of nuclear weapons and global trade, major powers regularly went to war with each other. A preemptive strike by the US on North Korea could not possibly guarantee the elimination of all North Korean nuclear weapons. North Korea has a massive number of underground bases and bunkers, where these weapons and missiles are most likely stored. Their ballistic missiles, even the intercontinental ones, are mobile. This means that they can remain hidden in these bunkers until they have to come out to launch. A decapitation strike on the North's leadership is also unlikely to succeed, as the forces guarding the nuclear weapons are handpicked by the regime for their loyalty, and would result in a North Korean nuclear response as well. The only solution will be a full-scale invasion of North Korea with US and South Korean forces. However, in 2013, the US Army War College played out a war game called Unified Quest, a scenario of the US invading the North. The result was that it could take up to 56 days to secure North Korea's nuclear weapons and facilities. And that was before they developed their more advanced mobile ballistic missiles armed with nuclear payloads that they have today. And for these reasons, I find it highly unlikely that China would go to war with the US over North Korea, and by extension, unlikely that the US would initiate a war with North Korea. The cost for both parties is now simply too great.